Hello and welcome to another episode of VFX with Natron. I'm your host, Pirate Bill. Don't forget it. Alright, today we're going to be talking about something that somebody once asked. Somebody asked, can we paint with light? I said to myself, paint with light? Well, yeah, you can paint with light, but what do you mean? Well, the person was looking to figure out how if you take something like a flashlight and start to wave it in front of the screen or in front of a camera, you create you can create letters, and if you trace it over time, you can create words. And so we're going to try and do that, but we're going to do this in a virtual sense because I'm not going to go out of my way to record video. We're going to actually do this inside of Natron itself. I just realized Natron isn't quite booted up yet. I'll just have to wait for it to start, and as soon as it is, we'll switch over to it. And that will be that. Here, we'll just go over and wait for it. So, just waiting for it to start. Sorry about that. So I guess I shall start talking about some other things after this is over. Oh yes, first, if anybody has questions about today's episode or questions in general, feel free to ask during the episode. Also at the end, if we have time, I'm going to show something that I'm working on. I want to get feedback. It's not really related to this, but it might interest a few people. So yeah. With no further ado, let's get back into Natron and talking about painting with light. All right. So, what we first need to do, because we don't have anything, I want to make a reference for what I want to paint. And obviously, the most obvious thing in Natron that most people are probably going to want to paint is going to be text. So we'll start with a text node, and we're going to turn off transform. We're going to set the justification to word. We're going to set it to centered. We're going to set it to centered in both for the justification in both horizontal and vertical alignment. And we're going to put in a nice easy word to write. Oh yes, I'm going to stipulate right now that the process, we're only going to be using a single stroke. If you wanted to do multiple strokes, you're going to have to basically do the first two parts of this, what we're going to be doing, other than the text node, like for T's and I's and things. You would have to, anytime you want other words and so forth, you would have to actually create a second circle, or radial, or anyway, we'll get into that further as we go. I just want you to know we're only going to be focusing on doing one stroke today, and then you can just take that and duplicate it and feed it into a merge node and make more. So yes. So for now, we're going to do something simple with no extra bits called hello, HELLO, nice and lowercase too, because I don't want to have to cross over that H. All right, so we'll keep it nice and simple. I'm also going to make it big, about 200. And we're going to make it a nice scripty font, and I just happen to use a nice scripty font. Let's see. Oh, where's my scripty font? There it is. I'm going to use this as our reference, and we have a little bit of... all right, we have the interface over it, but that's all right. We're not going to worry about that for right now. So, we're going to, because we're overlaying something over this. What we're going to be overlaying over this is a radio. So we need a merge node first. Okay. And then off to the side over here, we're going to make a radio. So radio. Create that radio. Now, I'm going to let people know, while you could technically animate the radio, there's two things I'm going to let you know. First of all, you don't want to animate your radio because we need motion blur. And you can't motion blur a lot of draw objects like radials and gradients and cubes and or is it Rex? Excuse me, Rex. They don't have motion blur ability because they're not considered animating nodes. The type of node you want to use when animating things is a transform node. This is why we don't. I've seen people in some videos actually transform their draw nodes. Text nodes the same way. You shouldn't really transform your text node. Text node, the reason it has scale is so that you can set up your initial sizes and so forth. But anytime you want to do animation to it, really you should be dealing with that in a separate node. And we'll get into that. We'll be using this. You've probably seen it in the past, but we're going to be using that as something for the future as well. Anytime or almost every time we'll be using transform unless it's something that can't be dealt with via transform. So anyway, the other thing I wanted to talk about with this is that this is really going to be a time-consuming. This can really do a heavy-duty hit on your rendering times if you don't set this up correctly. And a key element to this is going to be keeping that radial node, the area around it, the region of domain, I believe is what it's called, the ROD. You can see it up here. It says ROD. That's the area around any given element that you bring into Natron or create in Natron. By default, ours is our output resolution. That's what our view is showing and that's what our text node is set to. But if we actually look at our radial, right now our radial is 1920 by 1080 because that's what the default resolution of our project is. But we're going to actually be shrinking this down to, we're going to first set our radial to be uniform scale, and we're going to, or uniform size actually, and we're going to set the uniform size to 32, oops, excuse me, not 32, 35. All right. And when I do that, it makes it very small. And when I'm going to hit center so that it's centered in our screen. Okay. And you'll notice now that the region of domain, this is really small. The reason is that I want to keep this for speed purposes. I want to keep this as small as possible. If I make it the full 1920 by 1080 or bigger, it's going to take a long time to draw when we're actually drawing. And we're going to try and draw these words in real time. It's not going to be perfect, but it'll be close. And honestly, if you really have a problem with this, you can fine-tune your animation after it's all done. But for right now, I just want us to focus on the fact that we want to keep this small for drawing purposes. So don't add anything as a source into your radial, or it's going to expand that ROD to a bigger size. All right. So we have this set up. We're gonna, I just want to make sure, yes, we've centered it. We've set it to the right size. I'm going to now add a transform node. Transform nodes, we just hit T. We have a radial. So there's our transform node. It happens to be perfectly on top of it. We can see it's there. And we're going to take our transform node and pipe that into the A input of our merge node. But there's a few things we want to do to our transform node at this point before we go start viewing it from the merge node. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set it to make sure that interactive update, which is right here, make sure this is checked. If that's not checked, we can't animate this as time progresses. It has to be on for the next part when we actually start tracing over our thing. And I'm going to get we'll get into that. The other thing we need to do is while we're on frame 1, we want to set our first keyframe for this. So it doesn't matter that we're at 00, it doesn't matter where we are. We need to set a keyframe. So I'm going to set a keyframe for all dimensions. Now I'm going to go back to take our viewer and put it back on our merge node. Okay, this also brings up another thing, which is our hello is currently the same color as our radial. So I'm going to actually take my text node and I'm going to just take my font color, just darken it down to about half. I don't know if you can see what I did there. My picture may be over it. Probably was. I changed the font size to, the font color to just under 50%. Okay, under 0.5. Let me just so you guys can see this for a second. Here, let me just take me off so you can see over here. I set the font color to basically 0.491. All right, and so that makes it so it's darker so that we can see when we're drawing on top of it. All right, we've got that set up. I want to make sure I have my transform node selected. I want to make sure I have it appear in our properties. Now I'm going to put the center of my transform node over the beginning of the first part of my H. And I'm going to hit this with my mouse over the viewer area. I'm going to hit the space bar to maximize this. I'm also going to hit F to make sure that I have centered it, made it fill the screen. I'm also going to zoom in a little bit so that we have it as, I want to have it nice and big, all right, so that we can definitely see this. All right, so I'm going to click on the center of my transform node right now, and with the center of my transform node selected, I'm going to, on my keyboard, I'm going to be hitting L, and that's going to start. I'm going to just go down here and show you the down here in our frame range down here. By the way, if this isn't showing from 1 to 250 at this point, by the way, oh yes, also make sure your frame range is set to, if it's a really big word, you're going to need to increase the frame range to animate the entire thing. For hello, 250 frames is going to be fine, but if we were to like put down something like supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, well, yeah, we're not going to be able to do that in 250 frames. So anyway, make sure your frame count is long enough so that if you're animating this real time by hand, that you have enough frames. But we need to start it off frame 1. We're going to be hitting the L key on our keyboard, okay? After we make sure we have this selected, so I'm going to grab this again. Now I'm going to hit the L key, and I'm going to try and draw this as, make sure my mouse is centered on my mouse pad, or if you have a drawing tablet, it might be easier. Anyway, I'm going to center it. I'm going to hit L. I'm going to start drawing. All right? H... E... L... O... And we're going to go swing it back around, and I'm going to give it a little curl at the end. All right, there we go. So we got through it, and we can stop our animation. And now, when we hit play, if we actually hit play, let's see, it should be taking it sweet old time to update. For some reason, let's make, whoops, I'm going to back this up, hit play, there we go, we can see it, it's jumping around a little bit, but it's going fine enough. Alright, so there we go. So now that we have that done, I just want to verify that I'm at the point where I want to be, and I haven't missed anything. Oh yes. I want to point this out. if we were to have done multiple frames or multiple animations, you should always do each one of your individual bits for your, if you were doing additional things, like additional strokes, like if you had T's and you wanted to do T's across it, or you wanted to do dots and so forth, you would do those. The sample animation I uploaded earlier, I was trying to do that quickly because I did this whole thing this morning just to make sure we had something, a reference that was functioning. But you can do it better and so forth. And you can clean up, as I say, you can clean up these animations. If we go over to a curve editor, I could go in here and say, okay, looking at here, this doesn't look, I don't know. I've come down, this is where the H comes down, it goes across, there's a little couple bumpies over here. I might clean this all up. I'm not going to do this right now, but I'm just pointing it out. You could go back through this and start cleaning it up. But the key thing is when you do multiple strokes, you want to make sure that you remove your original stroke, create a second stroke. For example, if I wanted to, let's say, I'm just going to copy this. If I had these two strokes, I'd animate my second one. You know, I'd hook this up to A and I'd animate it and do whatever I'm going to do to it. Again, from the beginning, and do the bit where I want it in time. And then, if you need to have the other strokes in there, put them in. But do note that on slower computers, the more of these you have going simultaneously, the more of a burden it's going to be on your computer, and the slower that input is going to get. So that's why I recommend doing it only one bit at a time. Then you can retime this stuff later on or do whatever else. But it's about getting all your strokes captured and put in. Then once you've got them all, what you can do is you can link them into, because merge nodes in Natron allow us to have multiple inputs, we can actually feed multiple inputs in and they'll all render simultaneously on output. However, what we also want to do is, because we're going to be doing, we're also going to be turning on motion blur here. And this is another reason we want to keep these small, is because motion blur adds a lot of time to our renders, and the bigger area of ROD that we have, the longer that motion blur is going to take to calculate. And so by keeping that small, we will increase the speed that our render time takes, so we can get all our strokes done quicker. All right. But the other thing is if you have a lot of strokes, you don't want to have to go into each individual stroke and decide, oh, I want to increase the motion blur on this stroke, or for all the strokes, or decrease them, or whatever, because your strokes weren't perfect. You want to be able to control them all at once. And so what I recommend doing is setting your properties to 2, and then pulling up the 2 transformations simultaneously. And I'm covering over the bottom, so I'm going to temporarily disable my view and show you. So what I would recommend is, if you're doing this, I would just take one of them, and actually I want to make sure that I'm transferring from my main one, which is radial 1. Transform 1 is going to be my primary. Transform 1_2 is going to be my secondary. And what I would do is I recommend hard linking the motion blur from transform 1 to the motion blur of transform 2, and then do the same for the shutter. Take that and do that, and then for every one of them I would recommend doing a hard link for them. That way you only have to adjust the first one, and you know all the other ones. If you disable it, it's disabled for all. If you enable it, it's enabled for all. It's a good habit. That way you're not messing around and constantly having to screw around with that stuff later on. So now back on my transform 1, let's shift back to 1 property. All I have to do is I have to set, first I'm going to set my shutter angle to 1, because I want the ghosting. This is supposed to be a flashlight. going across, and I want to capture as much of that from one point in space all the way to the next point in space. So I want to increase my shutter angle for as long as possible. So I'm going to set it, well, let me rephrase it. I want it to be as close to one full frame as possible. So I'm going to set the shutter angle to 1. That's going to make it last from one frame all the way to the next, which is going to take it from where the current circle is to where the next circle is. We'll deal with the motion blur or the blending of this. This will aid when we get to the next section. It'll make... We're not going to worry. All right. So the other thing is we want to set our net motion blur to 0.1 because I don't want to make it take too long. So now when, oh yes, we need to, let's make sure, I'm going to just, for the time being, I don't need that other one. I'm going to bring this back. And for people who are wondering, the other thing you'll notice about this is that the reason that we're not doing this drawing with light solely with the motion blur is because if we drew out the motion blur long enough to last the entire animation, it would increase the render times astronomically. B, it would make the pixels of your motion blur stretched out so thin you would have to crank up your motion blur a lot. And you don't want to do this. And B, and the other thing is we did that when we made the pulse animation before, because the pulse animation, when we were doing the waveform, we were doing it in a single frame. And when we're doing it in a single frame, to capture the entire frame, we have to keep the motion blur. But at this point, we're using multiple frames. So what we really want to do is focus on keeping the history of our animation, of what we've done. So I will recommend, because I did several tests of this, at this point I would recommend turning this into a second project and rendering this out. And the way we would render this out is the same way we did in the past. There's a very similar fashion to the way we did it for when we made the fire animation. I would create a write node, and I created this section called quick blur. As you can see, I already made it. We're going to just call it, give it a name. For the time being, I'm just gonna we'll pretend it's in here. We'll go blah, whatever you're gonna call it. .exr. Oh yes, hashtag several times. Oops, excuse me. 4 hashtags because I always recommend 4. That gets you 9,999 frames. Or actually 10,000 technically, but then you want to put .exr because we need to keep this 32-bit float so that we retain the ability to increase the light level. We're treating this as light, so we want to be able to keep this in 32-bit float. So we'll hit save, and under this, that's automatically set our write node to be an EXR based. So under our bit depth, we'd set it to 32F. And because we want to keep this simple, I want to just keep this DAWB, which is going to keep it the smallest file size. It's going to be smaller than a 16-bit PNG sequence, or it should be, I would hope. And that should be good enough. That's all we would have to do here. We would save that, and then we would create a new project, okay? And in our new project, what we're going to do is we're going to import that. Now, I'm not going to render that out because that would go beyond the end of this animation or of this project. So we're going to do a read node. So for a read node, I didn't launch my keyboard shortcut shower. Oh, well, I apologize to all of you. I'm still new to this whole live streaming thing. All right, so I'm going to hit the R key to create a read node, okay? Then I'm going to go to my project, which is not here. Okay. Fortunately, it's still in my history. I have my history. I'll go to Quick Blur, happens to be the one I did for this, which happens to be hello. Here's the sequence. It was rendered exactly using the settings we just did. We're going to hit open. That creates that. We'll link it up, and this is we'll just render it out so we can see it. We can see there's our frames. We can see it rendering out our hello. Oh, I'm an idiot. I did skip one key thing before we did that. Oh, I'm bad. I forgot one thing. This would have rendered it out with our hello behind it. We want to replace the hello. We want to replace that with a constant. We want to put a constant in our original thing before we render it out. Put the constant behind it. That will keep it as it empty. We're using a constant, not a solid, because we want to keep the background blank, empty, alpha, pure alpha. Then do your render out, which will give us our next one, which will be this, which will have a nice alpha channel. If we go to our alpha, it'll have our alpha frames. All right. My apologies on that. I did skip that step, but we went back and fixed it. All right, so we're going to put this up here like this. We're going to put a merge node here. All right, we're going to, how much? Oh, we got about 5 minutes left. All right. We're going to switch our merge node to a top because that's the format I want to use for the blend mode for this. I know that. Just trust me. It's going to give us our light the way we want, because now we're going to color our light. What we're going to do is, oh, wait. I skipped a step here. We want one other node. Here's where we actually turn it into our actual, we're going to turn it into our actual trace light. We're going to use a node called the frame blend. Frame blend. Right there. And what frame blend does is it looks at the history. It starts off at the beginning. In fact, we don't even have to do much. We can go to the end of our animation. And currently it's set so that the first frame in this is -5. Now, our animation is 250 frames. So we're going to set it to 250. And now it's going to sit here for a while and calculate back. And this is going to take it a smidge just to figure this out. Give it a second. We can see it's calculating it out. This is taking it a long time. All right, well, while this is going, I'm going to tell you, this is actually, you do not want to keep the frame range set so that the first frame is set to 250. Instead, we're going to want to put an expression in here. Okay, and the reason is if we keep having it evaluate 250 frames from behind, it's gonna just keep going for however long, or for 250 frames. What happens if our length of frames is longer than that? We'd have to increase it. If it's shorter than that, we'd have to decrease it. We have to change our based off of the length of our animation. But beyond which, a lot of times, it will wrap around and pick our frames from the beginning, from the end of our animation. And we don't want it to do that either. Also, it will render before 0. And so what happens is we wind up with basically this solid super dot at the beginning of our animation. And it doesn't look like a flashlight pointing at the screen. It looks like a whole bunch of 250 flashlights stacked on top of one another going way back in history before our animation actually started. So what we're going to do here, well, all right. There's another thing that's going to be set. We're going to set an expression. Let's set our expression here. This is simple. We're going to set this to frame, okay, times -1, okay? And so what that's going to do is say every time our frame increases, we're going to basically increase it by our frame -1 times the negative of whatever our frame count is. And this is actually Natron will automatically increase this so that we will get 250 frames at the end, even though it's going to auto shift this to positive, if that makes sense. This is very useful. So we're going to just be frame times -1. We should get 250 frames. And the other thing we were going to do is we want to change this operation from average to some, because average averages out all the frames, and we're going to wind up with something that's dark. We want to say, whoops, not max, sum. And there we go. We can see our final animation here, and we can see that it's drawn out. Hello. We're looking at it at frame 250. Okay. So there's our animation. And all right, so you're wondering, well, if we've got a light, what else do we want to do here? Well, we're gonna be making this jitter around a little bit so that it looks like, I was watching the original source that this fellow had shown me, and it had some extra little jittery stuff to make it look like that it was wobbly and so forth. So to do the wobbly, that's what we're going to be doing over here with this merge node. And I'm going to pull this off, and I'm going to put in an SE. Let me just double check. We're getting close. We're a lot further along. I'm going to put in an SE noise. Okay. And the SE noise, we're going to use this to drive an eye distort. All right. Let me just actually go back here. And we're going to be taking the results. I just want to make sure I have this. Right. We're just double checking some stuff. Oh no, I'm gonna. I skipped a step again. Well, some jumping around. I'm looking at my steps. We want to tint this. I skipped ahead. The point of the merge node here is to color this, because right now it's white. We can color this whatever we want. So we want to add a solid, because we don't care about alpha again. Solid. We're going to add a solid, and we're going to make our solid. Our solid is not going to be the source. It's going to be our A. Okay. And we're going to go here, and we're going to enable this to 3. And right now, we're going to just turn it so that it's red by taking the red level up 1 notch. Now, when we look at the result of this, that doesn't look very much like red light. It is a little pinkish, but it's not red. And this is one of the reasons that we want to paint with light. When you're painting with light, we have to understand, I like this about Natron, we can crank this way above 1. If this were integer, this would be as hot as we could make it if we were dealing with integer values. But we're dealing with floating point. Natron works in floating point. So what this means is, instead of stopping at 1, and this also creates a slight problem, we can set it to 10. And now you'll notice that's much redder. And we could even set it higher, but it's going to start oversaturating the edges. See, we can set it way higher, and it gets up there, and now the edges are just too sharp and whatnot. So let's set this back to 10. I liked how it looked. We have a nice pinkish edge to our light, and we're going to be merging in our some jitter into this to break up the edges of this. All right, so how are we going to do that? We're going to be, after this, we're going to put in an eye distort. So what is an eye distort? Whoops, I didn't hit the right thing. Tap. Whoops, not you. Eye distort. So an eye distort, first thing you notice is the screen went blank. Eye distort requires this, it takes your source image, and it makes it wiggle around based off of something that feeds into it. Okay, and so what we're going to feed into it, it needs a UV map to distort it. Well, what are we going to distort it with? Well, we're going to distort it with this SE noise. Okay, and we're going to plug our SE noise into it, and our SE noise looks a little bit funky. It doesn't look like it did very much. Well, part of that is because our SE noise isn't set up right. Let's set our SE noise. I want to make this a little more crunchy, so there's more nooks and crannies and dark areas and light areas on our SE noise. So I'm going to set this to 150. Okay. And I'm going to tell you right now, while we're here, we're also going to note that this isn't animating. So how are we going to animate this? Well, we're going to stop it first of all. Whoops. Go. stop it, go back to frame run, set our Z slope to, excuse me, not set our Z slope. We're going to right click our Z0. We're going to set an expression. We're just going to tell it that this is going to change based off of the frame. Okay. And by doing that, when we hit play, now it just changes as every frame, it's going to change that and give us a new value. The other thing we're going to do is take our gain, because this isn't punchy enough. There's not enough black to white to really distort our image very much. So we're going to set our gain to 1, which is going to make it much darker. And now this is going to create, well, if we go back to our iDistort and look at it, whoops, we need to go to the last frame. If we look at it, we see a few things going on here. Let's zoom in on this. First of all, one of the problems that we see is that it's getting black inside of our hello. And the reason that that is happening is because our SE noise is applying its own alpha to it. We don't want its alpha. We want the alpha of our light source. Or we want actually a solid alpha on it. So we're going to take the SE noise input or source, and we're going to connect it into that solid to pull its alpha. And then we notice that, whoa, that solved that. But it also made our whole hello shift a little bit to the right. And I'm not going to get into actually solving the exact amount. I believe that what this did is it just shifted it over by about 0.5. In the horizontal, that's what this is, the offset, and I believe the vertical was like 0.2 or something like that. But this is a distortion level about how much it's offsetting it for its distortion. Now, if this wasn't distorting it enough, we're going to say it's distorting it enough right now. It's added all this crunchiness, and so you understand what it's done. This is before. This is after. We're still off on our offset. Let's hit that to 0.5. Just, I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to worry too much. We're going to just leave it. I don't like how crunchy it is around. It's just too much noise around the side. So back over here in the SE noise, I'm going to take this, and don't worry about this, it being red. It's not a problem. Back in here, I'm going to take my octaves down so that it's softer. I'm going to set it to 4 octaves of noise. So as we can see, that made it softer. And if we go back, we can see that that's made the edge soft of our noise softer here. And technically, at this point, we're done. Let's actually look at what this looks like. Let's back it up, and we'll play through it, and we're going to just let it render out over time. And you could write this out, and you could put this over whatever you want for an animation in the future. Hopefully this is nice and big. Technically this is bigger than it actually would render in our animation, but this gives you the idea behind it. Now, anytime it gets really white, that's because my hand, when I was drawing it, paused. Okay, and but everywhere that it gets darker, that's where my hand moved very quickly. Like right here, here's a nice spot. You can tell my hand moved very quickly. That's all motion blur right there. That's what our motion blur did. Is it caught that the spaces between the dots, and it blends them all together, so that we wind up with this thing that looks like we've hand drawn it with a light in front of the camera, of course. And the smoothness of this, of course, is based off of how our hand moved or how fast our gestures went. If you did this with real light, you would have to adjust the shutter angle of your camera, or you would have to track in. Use like tracking elements and track your light, and then put a radial on top of the tracking node to follow it, and then again do exactly the same steps but to the tracked radial node, and you would wind up with an animation at the end. Oh, it's going back down. I was wondering why it was stopped, because it's doing the L. And this is just going to take a while. And do note, okay, the longer our animation gets, the slower this is going to be, because every frame that it moves forward in time, the more frames the frame blend is adding to the entire list of frames that it's evaluating. It's basically working from our first frame all the way to our last frame. On the first frame, it's only evaluating one frame. By the midpoint, it's evaluating half our frames. By the end, it's evaluating our entire animation. Now, if you know each element and you want to handle each frame, each piece of animation individually, what you could do is set up, conditions like saying, if it passes the end of it, just, use only this bit. So it doesn't evaluate, if the last frame of our animation, of our light moving, is like 150 or whatnot, we could stop it there. But it wouldn't keep adding on after that point if we stop it there. Just so you're aware. Truthfully, it would carry on to the end of the animation. But, we don't want to make this take forever. Anyway, I don't want to keep this going because we're running really short of time. We'll just look at this, what it's already done, and we can look at this. And this is basically what we've got for an animation. And it's not bad. And there you go. That's how you would do a light animation. And of course, you could adjust your noise. You could use a different type of noise. Change your noise settings to fit whatever you want. At this point, I'm gonna go over and look up at the questions and so forth, and see if anybody's written any questions. And it says, all I see is, here we are. What's up, man? Hey, what's up? The other thing I want to do is I also wanted to bring up something else, which is, I'm part of a pirate group. In case you hadn't figured it out, I'm a pirate. I wonder why. Why is he a pirate? Well, because I'm part of a pirate group, and I do animations for our pirate group, and we do a lot of little bitty live animations and stuff. That wasn't what my main job was for years. That's a different thing. But I'm going to, right now, we're going to be making an open source video, so that people who are interested in doing 2D animation will be able to. A lot of people who animate want to make animations, but don't have stories to work with. So I had come up with a story, and some people, I showed it to several people, and anyway, without further ado, I'm going to just show this. This is going to be an open animation. I just thought people might be interested.
Well, what are you doing on my parchment?
Captain, oh, thank goodness I caught you in time.
In time? In time for what?
Well, you know how we're in this here quarantine and can't be near one another, right?
Yes?
Well, Artemis and Black Rose was working on making us some voodoo communication scrolls.
Oh, is that what this is? Say, that's pretty neat.
Aye, but there's a problem.
Oh? Well, what's that?
Apparently, there's a chance that the parchment will explode on disconnect, so don't use them.
Explode? But you're talking to me on them right now.
Oh, good point. I gotta go.
No, wait!
Alright, so that was the animation. I just wanted to say that's going to be an open storyboard in the near future that people will be able to animate with, and I talked to people ahead of time and want to let people know about that. So people are going to be welcome to take that and animate it, and I'll have the audio resources and so forth available, and I'll have an official link and so forth in the future, just in case people are interested. But I just wanted to say, I'll have a great day and keep on Natroning, alright?